Welcome to Around the Empire. I'm your host, Joanne Leon. Around the Empire podcast is listener-supported independent media. Please pitch in at patreon.com/aroundtheempire or paypal.me/aroundtheempirepod. Also, please like, share, and subscribe on YouTube. Aaron Maté joins us today. Key allegations from the Russiagate conspiracy have now officially collapsed with the release of transcripts from witness interviews that were conducted over the past 3 years. Now the walls are truly closing in, and not in the way the Trump-Russia-obsessed media presented it in the past. Key Obama officials under oath said they had no evidence of collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia. And perhaps the biggest blow was delivered by CrowdStrike, the private security firm that served as a critical source on the Russian hacking claim. We now know that CrowdStrike's president told Congress more than 2 years ago that it had no real evidence that Russian hackers exfiltrated emails and passed them on to WikiLeaks. Aaron notes, in an understated manner, that this, quote, raises new questions about whether special counsel Robert Mueller, intelligence officials, and Democrats misled the public, unquote. At the end of the interview, there's an extra bonus segment for patrons on the question of which forces were driving the Russiagate conspiracy. You can find that at Patreon, episode 166 Extra. Aaron is the host of the Pushback Show with Aaron Maté at The Gray Zone, and he's a contributing writer at The Nation. We recorded this on May 21st, 2020.
Breaking news.
Another bombshell out of the White House.
I believe this is the beginning of the end.
I do too.
It's really the beginning of the end.
The beginning of the end.
He may be feeling the walls closing in on him.
All the walls closing in on him.
The walls closing in on him.
The beginning of the end.
The walls are closing in.
The walls closing in.
The walls closing in.
Aaron Maté's here, speaking to us from New York. Hello, Aaron. Thanks so much for coming on the show. I appreciate it.
Hey, Joanne, I think you were one of the first people to ever express interest in interviewing me about Russiagate, years ago now, because now we're in year 4 of this. So thank you, and it's great to be back.
That's great. Yeah, I was a doubter from the start.
You were?
Yeah, well, I mean, I have a lot of years of IT background, not in cybersecurity, but, you get to know certain things and you develop a sense of things because you've been troubleshooting and debugging and stuff for 20 years, So yeah, I just didn't see the evidence. And I had other doubts just because of the way the whole thing was just smelled from day one. But it was shocking to me that they didn't present what they had, even in some redacted form or something. It was just, the language is always so vague, but we never saw this. I mean, this is a real bombshell, Aaron. This one, this is really the walls closing in. And so let's talk about, for anybody who hasn't seen it, and I doubt that you haven't, because I think everyone has. Aaron, very soon after the House Intelligence transcripts were released, published an article on Real Clear Investigations. And you can find the link in the show notes. And it's titled, Hidden Over 2 Years, Dem Cyber Firm's Sworn Testimony. It had no proof of the Russian hack of the DNC. Well, the first thing that crossed my mind was, why is Julian Assange in that prison? And no wonder you're shutting him up when he came forward and said he had some technical evidence to show you that he did not get it from the Russians. Mm-hmm. But so Sean Henry, first of all, I was kind of surprised that he admitted this. And in fact, as you note, he had to reiterate over and over. He had to tell them, look, guys, all I've got is circumstantial evidence. Do you want to just talk about that a little bit, or what you found? Because you were the first one I saw that came out. Apparently you went straight for this transcript and released this. We were all like, whoa.
Well, I did. Yeah. So a bunch of transcripts came out. This interview with Sean Henry of CrowdStrike was conducted in December 2017, but it was only released now amongst many other transcripts. And I think we know why, is because all these transcripts undermined what Adam Schiff, the House Intelligence Committee chair, has been saying publicly that there was secret evidence of collusion and of Russian hacking. And the reason I went for this transcript in particular is because the collusion thing by now we don't have to spend time on that anymore. Yeah, this is a huge bombshell, and unfortunately, we're just hearing it now in 2020 instead of in December 2017 when it was made, when CrowdStrike President Sean Henry made this admission. CrowdStrike, of course, is the firm that was hired by the DNC to investigate a supposed breach of its server. And CrowdStrike is the firm that generated the claim and first made publicly the claim that Russia had hacked the DNC and had stolen data from the DNC server. And that's what basically set off this entire Russiagate thing. So the fact that Sean Henry is now admitting, or we find out that he has admitted, that actually they had no evidence that these alleged Russian hackers took anything off the server is huge. And it's just amazing that we're only hearing it now. But of course, that's part of a pattern where, you have these explosive Russiagate allegations, and then they only become undermined when the actual evidence comes out not long after. In this case, 3 years after. And what's crazy about his testimony is he shows a pretty basic lack of understanding of this alleged breach.
Yeah.
I mean, not only does he on multiple occasions say, yeah, we have no actual evidence that these hackers actually exfiltrated anything, he's then asked, okay, well, so how else could they have gotten these emails if they didn't take it off the server? And he actually says that Russian agents could have taken screenshots of every single email as DNC employees read them.
Yeah. Can I just insert something right there? WikiLeaks does a particular verification of emails it's called DKIM verification. You can't do that with screenshots, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And what I'm saying is what's amazing is that, so we know that, right? But this guy is the guy who was in charge of investigating the breach of the server and remediating it. And, he doesn't know that. So if he doesn't know
that's
that,
weird.
He doesn't know that, and he's coming up with this weird alternate theory that Russian agents took screenshots of every email. And he also doesn't know whether or not there's even any evidence of Russian hackers actually taking the emails off the server. Then what else doesn't he know? And why have U.S. intelligence officials based their claims off of what CrowdStrike found? Because, that's a fact that they did. It was CrowdStrike that gave the FBI images of some of the servers, or some of the hard drives used for the servers, but not even all of them, as Sean Henry also says. He says we only gave them a couple of copies of hard drives. And it was the FBI that relied on CrowdStrike's redacted reports. And so if the basis for your allegation comes from CrowdStrike, and if CrowdStrike itself doesn't even know whether or not alleged Russian hackers actually took anything from the server, how can you so confidently accuse Russia of stealing these emails from the server? It just doesn't add up. Now, the Mueller report points to other evidentiary sources beyond CrowdStrike. So I can't say that Mueller relied entirely on CrowdStrike, because there is this reference to the GRU exfiltrating data and putting it on a server that was leased in Illinois. But the problem there is we don't know the evidence for, what the evidentiary basis is for that claim. And we do know that they relied at least partly on CrowdStrike. So when it comes to this core issue of whether or not Russian hackers actually took anything off the server, the entity that first made that allegation and was used by intelligence officials to make that allegation has just acknowledged that it is lacking evidence on that issue. So it's just one more hole in the Russiagate story.
And even before this, you and some others had pointed out that, well, just to pick up on your saying that he seemed confused about the basics of the case. When they ask him all right, so he said you have indications that the Russians hacked the server and that some data was staged for exfiltration. So somebody created some files. The plain language for that is somebody, took some files off an email server and put them somewhere on the DNC network.
Mm-hmm.
So, and they ask them, they say, well, what was the date? What date do you think this happened? And this is something I don't think you've ever gotten an answer to this question, but it was always muddled, right? Because he gave a date of April and the latest emails, May 25th.
Exactly. So even the date that he's not even certain about wouldn't even make sense, because the last email that was taken was sent, more than a month later on May 25th. And then you have the fact, and I believe, your previous guest, Jeffrey Carr, has talked about this, which is that, who he alleges are Russian hackers inside the server. His attribution there that they come from the GRU is totally based on inference and deduction. Yep. It's not even based on any concrete evidence. I mean, his language is basically, they say like that these hackers inside the system show the characteristics of tactics and software that we've associated with the GRU. So it's like that kind of tentative, qualified, ambiguous language, which leaves room for, all sorts of ambiguities and actually lack of concrete connections. Plus the fact that when CrowdStrike has made a similar attribution before, they had to walk it back. So
you're talking about the Ukraine military app?
Exactly. So when they accused the GRU of hacking into Ukrainian military software and using, by the way, the same software and characteristics that they claim to have identified inside the DNC server, they had to retract that claim. It was shown to be false. So not only is there attribution here, totally sketchy, in that they acknowledge they don't have evidence of exfiltration, they also have a really bad track record of making this. So it's like the idea that we're relying on them and that their claims have been taken at face value is just shown to be that much more ridiculous. On top of the fact that they are a DNC contractor with all sorts of complicated, with partisan ties. So the co-founder is a fellow at the Atlantic Council, which basically exists as a pro-NATO think tank. Sean Henry, the guy who testified, he formerly worked at the FBI as a deputy under Robert Mueller.
Oh.
So, and by the way, Sean Henry has also, since 2015, been a so-called national security analyst on MSNBC, the top Russiagate promoter. So the idea that these are like unbiased sources, on top of now them acknowledging they have no evidence, it's just like, it just shows how easily this whole scam was pulled off. Like, it was right in front of our faces with just like, sketchy actors being relied on as the basis for serious claims, such as, computer hacking allegations.
Yeah. And I'll link in the show notes 2 interviews with Jeffrey Carr, who picked this apart from the start. And he had some help because the actual developer in the Ukraine military of the app got really mad about this and refuted it. And then another organization whose data CrowdStrike had used to do this justification, they came out and denounced it too. And then CrowdStrike had to modify their report. Here's something, I should know the answer to this, but the report, this draft report, redacted thing that CrowdStrike gave to the FBI, has anyone ever seen that?
Nope.
I didn't think so, but I thought
it only came about, and this is just how absurd this is. I mean, this should normally be coming from, there should be like a media organization trying to sue for this, fighting a legal battle, but it had to come from the attorneys for Roger Stone. And
yeah, how about that?
That's how we learned about it, is that Roger Stone's attorneys got the DOJ to make that admission that they had relied on redacted draft reports from CrowdStrike, that the reports CrowdStrike submitted to the FBI were both redacted by CrowdStrike and in draft form. They weren't even like finalized. And that was admitted in the Roger Stone case, but we never got those. We've never gotten those reports.
God, it's hard to be stunned by anything anymore, Aaron, like if you've been in the weeds of this.
Yeah.
But honestly, really, it is stunning. I'm shocked that I still can be stunned. Mm-hmm. And now Mueller, in the Mueller report, I didn't read that whole thing. I was so fed up by that point. I, I didn't even listen to the opera version of it or whatever they crazy stupid thing they did. Um, did he actually interview CrowdStrike or Henry or someone in it? Like, who did they actually talk to? Or did they just go
They
by
all,
what the FBI told them?
they make very bare mention of CrowdStrike in the Mueller report.
Yeah.
All they say is that the FBI later obtained. There's some line about the FBI later obtained copies of logs and images. Let me see. I'll read it for you. Yeah. Uh, it says, Mueller report says, quote, as part of its investigation, the FBI later received images of DNC servers and copies of relevant traffic logs. So it doesn't, that's an ambiguous statement because it doesn't say whether they got images of all the servers, of all the hard drives using the servers, and just copies of relevant traffic logs. And, that tracks very much with what CrowdStrike says it provided. So this basically comes from CrowdStrike. And then and we've had conflicting messages. Like we've had people from CrowdStrike and the DNC said that they offered the FBI access to everything, but the FBI has said different. So even there's like a strange contradiction between the accounts that we've never gotten clarity on. And then you have Mueller bringing in this thing about the GRU leasing these servers in Illinois and Arizona and using them to exfiltrate the data from the DNC server. And we don't know where that comes from. We can't say this everything comes from CrowdStrike because obviously this Illinois stuff doesn't. But we don't know where the Illinois claim comes from, and we haven't seen the underlying intelligence upon which it's based. And then, as I've also noted, you also have in the Mueller report, Mueller starts using qualified language when he gets down to the task of describing the GRU actually stealing the emails. So he's talking about sessions between after May 25th, and he uses that during these sessions, GRU officers quote appear to have stolen thousands of emails and attachments. So I think to me that qualifier reflects a lack of certainty and a lack of concrete evidence on their part.
And at that point, the foundation of the whole thing crumbles, because if you don't have that and you can't prove that, what do you have? And in general, like what's left to justify that the Russians hacked the election claim? Buff Bernie? Is that it? Is that all we got?
What is proven is that a Russian troll farm took out some ads in the US on Facebook and Instagram, and that what's also known is that nobody saw them, and that most of them had nothing to do with the election. Most of them came after the election. And yeah, most of them were juvenile clickbait like Buff Bernie. And so the idea that this could have influenced the election, let alone, like even influenced a single voter, is just a complete joke. Again, I'm not ruling out the possibility that Russia or Russian hackers stole the emails because, it's hard to prove a negative, right? So yeah. It's possible, but all the evidence points in a different direction. None of the evidence that has been put out right now supports it. And, we have to ask, if it wasn't the Russians, then, what other possibilities are there? And, Julian Assange has always said that even if some state actors hacked into the DNC, that was not who gave us the stolen emails, and that our source was not a state party. And, which raises the possibility of, as people like Bill Binney and Ray McGovern have theorized that this came actually from a thumb drive, from someone on the inside downloading these emails to a thumb drive. So, I think, especially now with CrowdStrike making this admission, that possibility remains very much in play.
Yeah, that's always been I've also never ruled out that the Russians may have hacked it. I think the Russians probably hacked the DNC and the Chinese and the Israelis and that, 10 other actors, and add in some private actors. But, show me something. Show me something that holds water. And if we've never gotten that yet, So, and then, well, for a whole bunch of other reasons. The leak at this point, to be honest, for quite a long time now, I've leaned toward leak over hack anyway. I don't sign on to everything that McGovern and Binney have said. I don't think they have the certainty that, particularly Ray, who I respect a lot, but I think he's gone a little bit over his skis on saying there's proof. And other people have been saying it too. Oh, you know, Binney and Forensicator, and they proved that they really didn't prove it. They just gave an argument, that a strong argument, in my view, unless I'm not understanding it correctly. But
No, I agree. One of the DOJ prosecutors, in a response to Roger Stone, I think made a good point, because Roger Stone actually got affidavits from Bill Binney, and the prosecutor said, well, your claims about transfer speeds based on, that they only could have been done with a physical transfer, not a hack. I mean, but that doesn't include the possibility that basically someone hacked the DNC server and then transferred it to a physical device. And so
right.
so which I think is, I'm not technically adept enough to know, but I do think that certainly you can. I've never bought onto the idea that you can say with absolute certainty that it was a leak, not a hack. I think you can make arguments in that direction and present evidence, and it's something to consider. But just given how easy it is for so many different possibilities here, I've never been convinced that it only has to be this one thing.
Yeah, and the Cy Hirsch audio I found pretty convincing. But Cy Hirsch got that information from someone else. That person could have been lying, or that person could have been mistaken too. So that's not even 100% proof,
Yeah,
though it's pretty convincing.
Well, but Cy he also, I'm not sure what he said publicly about this, but I also know that he also himself could have just been playing with this guy he was speaking to in a bid to get information from him. People, our reporters do that. So it's like, and Cy also he's never put anything down on paper. He's never reported anything, so it's like, and that's how he really speaks. So I know he was reported saying something pretty damning, but the problem is he also could have been just trying to work this guy to get something from him as well. So you never know.
He didn't have the evidence in his hands either. He had an FBI source, he said. And then Ed Butowski, in this lawsuit that he's in, a back and forth lawsuit with somebody, in that, if I'm not mistaken, he claims that Cy Hirsch's source was Andrew McCabe. I'm like, what? So if that's true, I mean, all along the way, there's an element of doubt, and each one of these things could be wrong, so you don't know. But that really throws a monkey wrench into the whole thing.
Well, I see. I just don't trust that. I mean, I forgot if that's what that lawsuit says. It's not something I've paid a lot of attention to, but I just wouldn't. I just don't think. Look, first of all, if Cy Hirsch even has a source on this, I don't think anybody else would know about it. And I just have a hard.
Quite open about that, yeah.
And I have a hard time believing that. It would be Andrew McCabe. That just doesn't. That just doesn't make sense. But you're right, though. Yeah, I just looked it up. You're right. In that deposition or the affidavit, I don't. But the thing is, I remember hearing that recording of that call with Cy, and I don't recall him saying that McCabe was his source. So look, it's very easy to make errors here. It is quite possible that this was a leak, and it's certainly, especially now given CrowdStrike's admission, I'm totally open to that. But we just, we have to be careful on what we can say we know, and what we, and what we don't know. And there's just still a lot we don't know.
Exactly. It's a factor. It's a piece. It's a thread to pull on. But that's really, there's no evidence for that too. It's hearsay.
Yeah.
And I guess here's another thing before I ask you for just your overall big picture thoughts. This is such a bombshell. Well, first of all, in sort of in a fair media world, this would have been there would have been nothing else reported on the media for days or weeks, but that wasn't the case. There weren't very many people who picked up on it. It's also shocking to me that nobody leaked it. And why didn't somebody leak it or find some other way to get this out? Because it is so, this isn't the only thing in these transcripts. There are others. There's Samantha Power, there's Loretta Lynch, there's Susan Rice, all saying, now we really didn't have any evidence of it. We got no evidence.
Mm-hmm.
So it seems like there's one last tenet, right? There's one rule that nobody's allowed to violate. And that is that the Russians hacked the election, hacked our election, and this must never be denied. It's almost like, well, I'm going to speculate. It's almost like some deals were made based on that premise. It's also the ultimate alibi that will guarantee that nobody goes down for like the spying, the meddling, and all of this nonsense that happened. I say nonsense, but it was really serious nonsense. The Trump supporters call it an attempted coup, and it's kind of hard to argue against that. Why do you think that this didn't get out somehow?
There is total bipartisan consensus around, seeing Russia as an enemy state. There's a couple of Republicans, Trump apparently was one of them, who, don't see Russia as an enemy. But aside from that, there's overwhelming consensus that Russia is an adversary. I mean, that's why, Trump's national security policies doctrine names, Russia and China as our biggest enemies and puts great power competition at the center, no longer, fighting terrorism. So there's just a huge consensus around seeing Russia as an adversary. And Trump, himself, despite his talk about friendliness with Russia, he quickly, whether that was sincere or not, and he seemed pretty sincere about it on the campaign trail, he came into office and he just came up against people in his own circle and a national security state that just wasn't having that. And because he has no real political convictions himself, he just kind of goes off his instincts and also just what he feels will make him look good and will help him. I think he abandoned his calls for his interest in cooperation with Russia pretty quickly, as exemplified by his policies. So I just think there's such bipartisan consensus around seeing Russia as an enemy and painting it as an adversary and as a threat that, Republicans don't mind going along with this picture that Russiagate has painted of Russia being this existential threat to the U.S. via its, email hackers and social media ads. So there just hasn't been much interest in pushing back on that, even though, it was used, as you say, as a weapon against Trump. There was a conscious decision to try to delegitimize Trump's victory by painting it as the work of Russia, not just of Russia, but in collusion with Russia. And, while the Republicans have wanted to disprove collusion, they've been less interested in the, Russian hacking allegations because, that requires, I think, more, much more courage and much more effort in taking on the national security state interests that really want to demonize Russia and really want to have tensions with it. So I think that explains why there hasn't been as much pushback on that. But look, I mean, if you look at the Republicans, a lot of them, I think, just, from the point of view of what they could have done to dispel all this, that, a lot, even a lot of the collusion testimony that came out, a lot of the testimony that just came out sort of undermining the collusion claims. I mean, yeah, why wasn't that leaked earlier too? And maybe it's because because Republicans don't want to risk any legal cost of being caught leaking, but there are ways to leak, and they could have, but they kept pretty tight-lipped. So I mean, you can argue that they were, I don't know, sufficiently intimidated into not pushing back as forcefully on this whole thing as they could have.
Yeah, I think fear is the most likely explanation. Fear of whom? Well, I guess that's, if we knew the answer to that, we would know sort of who was behind all this. And yeah, of course, the Russians have become such a convenient scapegoat for everything. We laugh now at all the things that get blamed on. Oh, it was the Russians. There have been some recent ones that were really hilarious. It's not hilarious, really, but you have to understand our mindset, the people who've been following this for all this time. There's a lot of gallows humor that goes
I mean,
on.
and think about how convenient it is for Republicans too to have a political culture where all of our problems are blamed on Russia. I mean, that works for them as well because it takes them and the corporate forces and elites that they serve off the hook. So in many ways, I mean, yeah, it's like it's unfortunate for them that Trump got caught up in this and he gets accused of being a Russian plant. But at the same time, it's the rest of the narrative of basically blaming Russia for U.S. problems. It serves very much in line with Republican priorities, and it helps justify the massive weapons spending that all of them are on board with anyway. So there are aspects of this that are very convenient for their commitments.
Right. As far as him giving up on the better Russian relations thing, it really did look that way. But very recently, in one of his daily briefings, he went off on a rant, which he's done numerous times. And in this particular rant, I'd say it's about a week ago, he started saying, that this is a witch hunt. This is probably right after the transcripts came out. This is a witch hunt, blah, 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 blah. And then he goes on to say that, and, it ruined all our relations with Russia. And then he pledges that he's going to pick that project up again. He said, and now I'm going to continue that. Now that this is over with, I'm going to go back to trying to improve relations with Russia. Good luck with that. And he mentioned specifically that he is going to work on an arms. There are several really important arms deals on the table that are going to expire and they're going to be gone. And even just today, Trump's been doing a lot of doublespeak, right? You can understand a lot of reasons why. He's afraid he's not going to get reelected, and he's starting to remember the things he promised, and he's trying to, make excuses, I guess, for why that didn't happen.
And now I know why Shifty Schiff, dishonest, corrupt politician, why this guy didn't want these papers exposed. Because all these people said under oath, where they go to jail if they lie, they were totally, no, I didn't see any collusion with Russia. I saw nothing. No, I said, but he was on television before and after saying there was massive collusion, like Putin was my best friend. We had no calls to Russia. We had no calls from Russia for years. And all of a sudden, we have this great friendship. And by the way, getting along with Russia is a great thing. Getting along with Putin and Russia is a great thing. And stuff like this makes it impossible. And that leads to very bad things, very bad things. That was a very nice call. And remember this, the Russia hoax made it very hard for Russia and the United States to deal with each other. They are a very important nation. We're the most powerful nation. They're a very powerful nation. Why would we not be dealing with each other? But the Russia hoax, this absolute dishonest hoax, made it very difficult for our nation and their nation to deal. And we discussed that. I said, it's a very appropriate time because things are falling out now and coming in line, showing what a hoax this whole investigation was. It was a total disgrace. And I wouldn't be surprised if you see a lot of things happen over the next number of weeks. This is just one piece of a very dishonest puzzle.
Now, you've been trying to arrange an arms control summit with President Putin and President Xi. Is that getting anywhere?
We are talking about arms control with Russia, and we will go forward with that, and we are talking about it very seriously, having arms control. They have many nuclear weapons, and so do we. And we're talking about arms control with Russia. Yeah, they'd like to do it. We'd like to do it.
I mean, is it the Clear Skies Treaty just got canceled? So
The Open Skies Treaty, yeah.
Open Skies, sorry. Yeah, I mean, that kind of shows that this was probably some more Trump doublespeak, or the most generous, I guess, reason I could give is that Trump is not allowed to do this. He's just realized he cannot do it. Whether it's a conclusion that he has come to on his own or whether there are people who have more power than him, I guess that remains to be seen. But going back to the elitist attitude, and I think you had a great term for it, privilege protection racket. What did you call it? The whole Russia thing.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, it is. It's stunning, the elitist attitude that brings this sense of entitlement. You could just crush other people for your own gain or agenda. The inability to admit when you're wrong. You see it in the intelligence circles, especially, I think, but even from people who came from humble backgrounds. You see it in the Ivy Leaguers and the wealthy and the powerful. It's very prevalent in the Obama administration, but especially in the intelligence complex. And I guess that may have been the thing that really got under my skin the most. Plus the fact that I hate these big lies, and they basically turned this country upside down for 3 years over this thing. And God knows what the long term consequences are going to be. But I found it really shocking, and I was glad that you started putting some analysis labels on that, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, this whole thing, in the name of protecting democracy from, a foreign threat and from Trump, has really been a massive way to subvert democracy and just protect the privilege of the powerful sectors who felt threatened by Trump's victory. Foremost has been Democratic Party elites who, lost to Trump in 2016. It was their legacy that was defeated. The obvious lesson from 2016, where this reality TV show host posing as a working class champion won for the Democrats, would have been to actually adopt genuine anti-establishment politics and pose a genuine challenge to Trump when, to show that all of his claims of standing up for workers were false. But the problem is doing that would threaten the, basic model that Democrats have functioned on for many years now, which is to, serve as vassals and as servants for the neoliberal elite. And so, changing their policies would have threatened their own privilege within the economic system that gave rise to Trump. And so that wasn't an option. So they needed a way to deflect responsibility. And the way to do that was to blame Russia and to, basically excuse their own failures by saying it was Russia's fault, and that the answer to it was Robert Mueller, who was going to bring Trump down and reverse the Trump nightmare. And this was convenient for everybody because it also meant that journalists, working in corporate media, could pretend to hold Trump accountable by going after him on Russia and this fantasy Russia conspiracy, instead of really taking a critical look at all the factors that gave rise to him and the failings of the economic and political system that gives them status and gives them access and gives them power. And the same thing for intelligence officials. Trump was talking about better relations with Russia. He was talking about, not intervening in foreign countries. And a good way to delegitimize him, and also to delegitimize the appeal of that message, was to basically, give it the taint of Russian influence, that this was really just Russian talking points. And that's why Trump was here, and that's why he was saying all this stuff. So Russiagate has been a perfect privilege protection racket. It's relegated everybody to the sidelines, where instead of, mobilizing a resistance that is based on improving people's lives and addressing people's concerns and speaking about real issues, it's basically meant that to resist Trump has meant, watching MSNBC or CNN every day and waiting for Robert Mueller's bombshell, which of course never came. And it also just is premised on such elite contempt for average people. This idea that the reason why they voted for Trump or didn't vote for Hillary was because Russia convinced them through stolen emails or stupid social media ads. Even the contempt for average people it's there in multiple ways. First, it says that, you didn't vote for this guy because of your own choices, but because you were duped by foreign propaganda. And then it says, the issues that matter to you are just not important. And we're going to spend 3 years talking about Russian conspiracy theories and arming Ukraine and all these issues that don't matter. So it's just, for all the talk that we've seen in media about, Putin and this propaganda swaying Americans. It's entirely an act of projection. It's, coastal educated elites convincing themselves that the reason we have Donald Trump is not because of the failings of the system that they have all enjoyed privilege in, but because Russia made it happen. And so, that's why I call it a privilege protection racket.
Yeah, the projection is just astounding. I joke around and say it's gotten to the point of psycho projection with like people like John Brennan. Every time I read his tweet, I'm like, does he even realize that he's talking about himself? But
Yeah.
I got a couple, just as we wrap up, I got a couple questions a couple of my colleagues gave me. The first one is, I'd be interested in what evidence or documents Aaron is looking for or hoping to get released to expose the truth of the start of Russiagate. Is there anything out there that you know of or wonder about or that you're still hoping to get?
Well, it'd be great, as we talked about, it'd be great to see CrowdStrike's reports, the one that they submitted to the FBI.
Yeah.
It would be great to see any underlying intelligence that was used to make the attribution of a hack to Russia. Because I suspect that that is not going to be as convincing and as concrete as we were told. And, anything that the NSA has, especially if it has anything on Julian Assange communicating with anybody in the U.S., because if this was an internal leak, then the NSA might have something of Assange communicating with whoever the leaker was. So, I mean, that will never get released, obviously, but that would be great to see. And yeah, I mean, look, we just recently got the electronic communication from the FBI that showed the opening of Crossfire Hurricane. And it just shows how baseless this done. The FBI launched this entire thing based completely on vague hearsay that, Papadopoulos had suggested to Alexander Downer, this Australian official, that the Russians might be able to help with some kind of unspecified anonymous information, nothing even about hacked emails. And that is what the FBI used to open up a counterintelligence investigation of a presidential campaign. It's the most baseless investigation at that level, at least, that I've ever heard of at that high level, because that's a serious thing to open up an investigation of a presidential campaign. That's not like, that's you should be able to surpass a pretty high bar, and the bar here is the lowest thing I could think of. It's just basically hearsay about hearsay. And so we know that was baseless. So yeah, I'm just interested in any document that can shed light on what informed U.S. intelligence officials' claims that Russia did the hacking, because everything we've gotten so far shows that there is just a extreme absence of evidence.
Yeah, I'd like to know more about Brennan's task force that he formed, and I'd love to see his communication, so I doubt we ever will. But the other question is, I've always thought that he is behind it. I think he was serving other people, but I think he had his own personal reasons too. But the other question they had is, they're curious what you think about the Durham report.
I mean, my guess is as good as anybody else's. What I do know is that what is happening now is entirely predictable, that Russiagate would collapse and it would hand Trump multiple gifts. First of all, it handed Trump the gift of, instead of having a resistance that was focused on, like his tax cut for the wealthy or any of the other horrible things that he's done, it was focused on proving, fictional conspiracy theories. So that was a gift. Then there was the gift of Russiagate collapsing and Trump is exonerated. That was a second gift. And now we're having the third gift where now we're getting all the damning information about how this fraud was conducted. And it's all coming out right in time for Trump's reelection campaign, which is it's perfect for Trump. It works out great. And this was all something that, a few of us predicted a long time ago. And I think we'll get more revelations just showing what a scam this was, and whether that will lead to criminal prosecutions. I don't see a point in speculating. I have no idea, but
not in a million years.
Well, but,
maybe some small fish.
I don't know. I mean, look, this was a scam. There was fraud involved. There was fraud involved in deceiving the FISA court. there's got to be, I'm not a legal expert, but I think you can find something in there to get someone on. How high up it goes, and look, there was after the election, there's a message from, I think, Julian Assange or somebody at WikiLeaks to Donald Trump Jr. after they started talking and just saying, just so you know, they can destroy all the documents on the way out. And I think that will prove to be prescient, because I think, if there is evidence of malfeasance, I mean, if you're John Brennan or whoever else was involved,
they had lots of time.
They had lots of time to cover their tracks. So I just think there's stuff that we'll never even know for sure, but who knows? Certainly there's every right to investigate these people for this fraud. And, even though I think it will help Trump's reelection campaign, unfortunately, that was a gift that the Russiagators gave to Trump ultimately. And so we'll just see what that yields. But I think it's going to be a very interesting time. And for those of us who suffered through Russiagate, knowing the whole time that it was a scam, at least now we're in a different phase where now the thrust of it is finding out how the scam was perpetuated, instead of having to spend our energy and time trying to debunk the scam.
Yeah, exactly. I had one little tidbit to tell you about. I got to find it in my notes here. Basically, where is it? I got it here. NASDAQ report, just I think a couple days ago. CrowdStrike moves to strong buy. Rationale behind the upgrade. CrowdStrike Holdings could be a solid choice for investors given its recent upgrade to a Zacks ranked number 1 strong buy. This upgrade is essentially a reflection of an upward trend in earnings estimates, one of the most powerful forces impacting stock prices. The Zacks rating relies solely on the company's changing earnings picture. It tracks EPS estimates for the current and following years from the sell-side analysts covering the stock through a consensus measure, the Zacks consensus estimate. So, yeah, they haven't suffered in terms of earnings or their ratings. However, Motley Fool throws a little water on that, which is good. They're like, is this really stock a buy? And some of it, to be fair, is based on the platform, that they're a cloud platform, and they think the work from home is going to create all kinds of business for cybersecurity firms and things like that.
Right.
Motley Fool digs a little deeper and says, hey, these guys got a lot of competition. They say a bunch of other things. I'll put links in there, but I thought you might find that somewhat amusing.
Well, and I also know that their co-founder, Dmitry Alperovich, if I have his name pronounced right, he left not too long ago and started some new nonprofit, but he left and he cashed out with a lot of money. So he did fine. And yeah, that's, this, I mean, it's all a racket. It's all a racket. And, there's such profitability in this whole nexus of national security state and, political elites and blaming the right enemies for our problems. And CrowdStrike is definitely a very shady firm that has benefited.
So one last question. Who do you think was driving all this? Who was behind this? Is there any one or small group who you think was ultimately behind this? That last question, the extended part of my discussion with Aaron, for his thoughts on the forces behind Russiagate driving it, is a separate extra or bonus discussion available to patrons. So you can find that on Patreon, patreon.com/roundtheempire. I'm not great at marketing. It's not my forte, but I'm starting to provide more bonus material for patrons as is necessary for independent media funded solely by listeners, and because I appreciate them. And they make it possible to pay the overhead costs of this show and compensate a little bit for the labor that goes into it. So that's my tease, and I hope that some of you will subscribe to the podcast to get these kinds of extras. And there's also full patrons-only episodes, and soon a Discord channel, and hopefully some live streams for discussions among ourselves. So episode 166 extra available at Patreon. And now I'll just continue with the interview wrap-up, where you can find out how to find and support Aaron's great work. I hope you're writing a book on this or doing a documentary or something. And please tell everyone how to support you.
Well, I host a show called Pushback at the Gray Zone. And, we're doing a lot at the Gray Zone on Russiagate and on every other issue that, pertains to national security and empire and all that stuff. So thegrayzone.com is where you can find me.
Excellent. Thanks so much. Great talking with you.
Thanks, Joanne.
Thank you for listening. Special thanks to Aaron Maté. Follow Aaron on Twitter at Aaron J. Maté, M-A-T-E. Subscribe to his show, Pushback with Aaron Maté, at the Gray Zone channel on YouTube, and support him at Patreon. Around the Empire podcast, independent media, and your support's really important. Please pitch in patreon.com/aroundtheempire or paypal.me/aroundtheempirepod. The audio podcast, there are lots of ways to find it and to listen to it. Find it on any mobile podcast app or on the website, aroundtheempire.com, on Patreon, or on YouTube. And if you're listening on YouTube, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Follow on Twitter at Around the Empire, and we'll see you next time. Take care, everyone.